I think so. Cool. Hey, everybody. Hello, Carolina Con 14. All right. So yeah, Honeypots, Deception, Frankenstein. Okay. So about me, I work for a company called Signal Sciences. We do web protection. I work with a lot of our customers defending their web applications. So that's what I do. I've got a background in application security, but I've been, an enthusiast for honeypots for a long time. So that's kind of the origin of a lot of this stuff. You can find me on the socials. Those are the links there. And yeah, I'll be posting the slides on Twitter later tonight if you want those. So a couple advertisements. I do want to. How many people are local here to North Carolina and Raleigh area? Okay, so good amount. So like, there's a lot of faces here that I don't recognize, and I go to a lot of these meetups. So maybe you don't know about them. So I just wanted to highlight RTP Security and Beers, DEF CON 919. There you go. The OWASP chapter, and also League of Women in Cybersecurity. Which, there you go, there's some, okay, cool. So, and by the way, so League of Women in Cybersecurity does allow men to attend, so you can attend. And I'll actually be doing a workshop, maybe end of April there on one of the projects that I'm talking about. So if you want to go to that and kind of do some hands-on, sign up. Also, B-Sides Raleigh, which was rebranded as B-Sides RDU, and then of course InfoSecCon. So definitely check those things out. Another advertisement. So sorry, but this is a plug for my wife's festival. So I did this. By the way, I did a talk like this, but a 30-minute talk last year. I don't know if did anybody see that talk? A couple of people? Okay, so I promise it's not the same talk. There's some stuff that's the same because I want to, re-explain honeypots for people that are new to this. But anyway, so I did this too last year. The festival is for my wife. If you're into performing arts, it's an outside event at the park. She did it for the first time last year. It was amazing, and the town asked her to do it again this year. So anyway, check that out. All right, so the agenda of the cybers for tonight. So Honeypots 101, I definitely want to cover that for folks that are just not too familiar with the concept. And then cyber deception. So this is, I've been, talking to a lot of people about cyber deception, just kind of keeping an eye on that for a while. So it's this is really just, a sharing of my experience from, information from a lot of the conversations. And so definitely I would like to hear if anybody does have experience in that space. So, I definitely would, raise your hand and share experiences or any information you have about it. I'm not here to kind of define cyber deception. I'm just kind of sharing what I've learned. I'm going to do a quick update on HoneyPie. So HoneyPie is a project I talked about last year. And so I'll do a quick update on that. And yeah, and so then Frankenstein. Okay, so this will be a story about, so the project is actually called HoneyDB, but it's going to be a bit of a story of that kind of, how it kind of has evolved over the last year since the last Carolina Con. And then we'll have Q&A. Cool, so Honeypots 101. So there's a couple types of honeypots. There's production honeypots and research honeypots. But really what it is, it's some kind of computer you have on your network. It's intended to smell like a real computer, but it doesn't have a real production used computer or system on your network, but it doesn't have any legitimate business purpose. So it's really there to discover potential malicious actors that may have intruded your network and are trying to traverse to look for other assets on your network. So like I said, there's different types, so production and research. I'll kind of explain that in a little bit. And then also there's different levels of interaction in honeypots. So, just to kind of give you an example, you think about a telnet service, right? So you get a login, you get a banner, right? And then you try to log in. And then you might, if you guess the right credentials, you might be able to get a shell and run some commands. So with these different levels of interaction comes, the levels of risk you might take in running such a, process or honeypot. So the low interaction is really something that's really dumb. It doesn't really offer much interaction, right? It could just be showing a banner and a login screen, but you can't actually log in or do anything. So it's very limited. Or it could just be just opening a port listener, right? It doesn't really have any interaction at all. Just the fact that someone connected to that port might alert you to something malicious on your network. So with that, there's low risk in running that because, again, you're not exposing functionality that could be exploited by an attacker. Medium interaction, right? So that's more emulation. So perhaps, you on a telnet, you give that banner, you give that login, and they can guess credentials and then maybe get what they think is a real shell account, but it's emulated, so it's fake commands and responses to those commands as well. And then high interaction, I kind of consider that to be like a full-on, for example, a Linux host that they would actually log on to it and actually be running commands on the OS. But it's highly instrumented to contain it, but also to log all the activity and things like that. So obviously with that, there's a lot more risk in running that type of honeypot because they could potentially hack your honeypot. So for production honeypots, as I said, they have no legitimate business purpose. So if anybody, hits it, that's something that is of use, suspicious at minimum, right? And so, it could tell you one of two things in my mind, right? So one, it could be that, hey, something's misconfigured on the network, and it's just like spraying traffic everywhere that it shouldn't be, so that can help from an operational perspective. And then of course it can alert you to a malicious actor as well. So I do consider production honeypots to be, it's an additional layer to your defense strategy, but there's a lot of value in the alerts that they provide. And of course, the logging is going to be low volume, right? So it's less logging that you have to mine through or look for patterns to try to discover an attacker. You're just getting alerted to something that is high fidelity. And I think what you're achieving with honeypots is really introducing risk to the attacker, right? You want to make your network noisy and as dangerous to an attacker as possible. So that's the value in running honeypots in your network in a production environment. So again, where do honeypots kind of fit in this, right? So you have your preventative controls and your overall security program. You do control validation. You also have your detective controls. And so, you have your normal intrusion detection systems. You might be doing network traffic analysis, endpoint monitoring. So that's, kind of where I would fit honeypots in that category. And again, compared to those other controls that are producing high volumes of data that you have to sift through, honeypots give you that low volume of data, but high value. So research honeypots. So, they can have many purposes, just depends on what your goals are for the research. You could just be identifying malicious sources of traffic, discover active malware, botnets, command and control servers, and then learning about attacker techniques and tools. That might be more of a high interactive type research honeypot. So this is just an example, kind of a very basic diagram of what that might look like. You have these machines exposed to the internet, and some might be legitimate, but you have mixed in some, honeypots. So you have your bots, your scanners, malware, everything out there that's scanning the internet, and you can collect that information. So I always like to call out cool presentations that I've seen on this topic. So I highlight this here. So, and again, I'm making these slides available because I have some resources in here. If you are interested in this, you can go research it. And so Andrew Morris did an awesome presentation at ShmooCon in 2015. He went through, showing reversing malware, uncovering command and control servers. And it was really cool because he actually uncovered an imminent DDoS attack. So a botnet was spreading and being set up. And doing the reversing on that, he found a target that they were preparing to launch a DDoS against. And he was able to alert that organization ahead of time, and they were able to defend, mitigate that. So that's kind of the cool thing about research honeypots. You find stuff like that, and so yeah, I just think that's cool. So, and Andrew's done a lot of great work, and he's doing a lot of great work right now with a gray noise. So this is me. I'm more of like the hobbyist. So I kind of love that. It's kind of like, hey, I'm just out there looking to see what you find, with this guy with the metal detector. But anyway, so yeah, that's kind of where I sit with this. All right, so cyber deception. Like I said, I've been just talking to a lot of organizations about this. How many are familiar, have heard cyber deception? Are familiar with that space at all? So, like a few? Okay. All right, cool. So, I guess, I don't know if it's just marketing or whatnot, but they don't really want to call it necessarily honeypots. They want to call it deception. So, like I said, I've been talking to a lot of organizations, to understand how they're thinking about it, what they're thinking about when it comes to deception. So that's what I want to share. So, does anybody know the first rule of cyber deception? What's that? Oh, I set myself up for that, yeah. So if you're ever gonna, ironically, if you're ever gonna talk about cyber deception, or if you ever present on cyber deception, you have to have this image. This is the go-to image for deception. And so what this image is, it's in World War II, they were setting up fake tanks in order to kind of deceive the enemy about their movements and things like that. So pretty much every presentation has to have that, and so I vowed never to have it in any of my presentations, I guess except for this one. Okay, so like diving into deception, right? And like, what does that really mean, right? Like we have honeypots, and now we have this deception space. But it kind of boils down to these three things, and Wikipedia actually has a pretty good definition on it. So it boils down to automation, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then also there's this concept of lures and breadcrumbs, and then traps, which is really some type of sensor, or that's really the honeypot piece of it, right? So it's honeypots, these lures, breadcrumbs, and the lures and breadcrumbs are really to lead the attacker to your honeypot, and then automation just to make things easy, right? So fundamentally, like when you hear deception, that's kind of like the three pillars of what it's about. So with automation, it's making things easy. So your deployments, automating deployments to VMs, containers, or as a process or what have you, and then configuring the deception endpoints. So having that all automated and potentially centrally managed, and also API driven, right? So to build integrations and things like that. So I mean, you can imagine if you're defending a large network, and you're trying to deploy honeypots throughout that. Obviously, there's resource challenges and kind of orchestration challenges there too. So that these deception solutions have to have that automation component to it. So lures and breadcrumbs, as I mentioned, that's intended to lure the attacker to the honeypot. And so that could be a lot of things. And this is a short list. It's by no means complete. So an easy example is you could have, a text file that you plant on end users' desktops, and the text file might be called like HR FTP server, and inside that file it has credentials, right? So if that endpoint ever gets compromised through phishing or whatever the vector is, they might search around on that endpoint to look for other assets, and they'll find that file, right? And then they'll go hit that FTP server, which is your deception service, and then you've caught the attacker. So it could be shortcuts to applications or other services, browser artifacts, so history, favorites, cookies, database connection strings, again, and files and things like that, network drives. So it's really whatever almost anything you can imagine you could use as a lure or breadcrumb to get an attacker to go to a honeypot. So I summarize it as, deception solutions are just really fancy implementations of honeypots. So there's also these layers, right? So we kind of talked about the breadcrumbs, but when you think about how you're implementing deception in your environment, there's different layers, right? Like you can implement deception at the network service layer. So SSH, Telnet, FTP, right? That's pretty straightforward. But with also with applications, right? That kind of again, application layer gets kind of interesting because you could set up fake parts of just a web app, right? So fake parts of the web application that normal users shouldn't be accessing. And I think there's with applications. So if you're kind of observing what's going on in the world, and there's a huge shift to the cloud, right? And we're starting to abstract infrastructure out. So everything, all functionality is kind of getting abstracted out and pushed up to the application layer. So I think this is a really key component for deception in the future, long term, right? So you're going to have to start, instrumenting your applications for deception if that's part of your defense in depth. So data, so watermarks, triggers in a database, having records in the database that are contain certain tokens. So if you ever see those queried or what have you, that's potentially a malicious actor querying it. So there's different layers to think about in this space. It's not just, hey, you set up a service, telnet service, and wait for someone to hit it. Cool. Any questions so far? All right. So another call out to another great presentation that just happened at LastCon 2017. Herb Todd talked about his experience in applying deception in applications, particularly web applications. So great presentation. You should go check that out. One of the main takeaway from that presentation that I got from that was you really need to have a tailored solution, right? You can't just drop in a canned solution as a honeypot or a deception solution. It needs to be tailored to what your environment is, what's in your environment, and what your environment looks like. And yes, as I said, he gave the presentation and he had had to have that picture. So I think ultimately, in my mind, a goal for deception is, you're integrating it throughout your network and applications. And again, going back to that concept of just making your network dangerous or high risk for the attacker. So I think eventually, organizations that embark on implementing deception, they'll just have it integrated throughout, right? Almost anywhere you step, if you take the wrong step, you're gonna fire an alert or something like that. So I also started looking at the market, the deception market, and what's out there. And so this is kind of really what I've collected off of what's published on Crunchbase. And so there's approximately 20 companies, so vendors out there that are providing these types of solutions. They've raised at least $201 million among those. The top 5 of those were anywhere from 19 to 46 million. So there's already been 2 acquisitions of those companies, of some of those companies, and this is I believe really over the last 4 to 5 years. So it's a very young space right now, but it's definitely starting to get a lot of attention. Well, maybe not. More attention. Not necessarily a lot of attention, but definitely more attention. So I think we're going to continue to see it growing. So this is something I always thought about because I was a honeypot enthusiast. Is deception and honeypots have been around for years. In fact, this is a picture actually from B-Sides Raleigh, where Cliff Stoll's so he wrote, this book, The Cuckoo's Eggs. It's a well-known book, and it's, it's about deception. Very fascinating story, and he rocked it with an overhead projector for that presentation, Yeah, the transparencies. Yeah, I was like, yeah, he was like the nutty professor a little bit. So, but it was an awesome presentation. So this stuff has been around. So what's the challenge? Like, why isn't everybody already doing deception? And so that's always a question I've had. But I've just through, like I said, conversations with organizations and also just common sense. It turns out, I think, maturity, right? So I think that's a big part of it. And so what do I mean by maturity? So over the last 10 to 15 years, organizations have been focused on getting the basics done, right? So vulnerability assessment, patch management, all the usual suspects, right? Security awareness, all that stuff. So there hasn't really been resources for deception or even honeypots. It's just not a priority. But also, it hasn't really been fully understood. Folks might not understand the real risk of running honeypots or the lack of risk or what have you, right? So it's just not fully understood. I guess I should ask, are there anybody that are running honeypots today in their organization or deception solutions? I see one hand over there. Okay, so there's a few. So yeah, I mean, look, if you guys have experience to share, please raise your hand and share it, because I definitely want to learn from the folks here as well. So, cool. So, but I think what we're seeing right now is organizations are starting to become more mature. They're getting a handle on the basics. And so now they're starting to think about what are other additional layers that I can add to my security. So they're starting to think about this space. And, from the organizations I've talked to, there's definitely some that have started already, like folks raised their hand already. And some are thinking about it. Yeah, we think it's something we're going to start exploring this year, or it's something we have lined up for next year. So I think we're going to continue to hear more about this and see more progression in this space. And I think going back to that maturity question or the maturity problem, I think organizations are they don't really even know what a deception program looks like, right? Like what the goals are. So they're not just going to go out and buy a tool and throw it on the network and say we do deception. I mean, some people have, but I think the folks that are really putting thought into this are trying to figure out what it even means and how it's going to be implemented and what are the goals. So I've put together some initial thoughts. So if you're starting to think about a deception program, these are things you might want to think about. So the scope of it, are you after identifying intruders or insider threats or both? The output of it, alerts versus counterintelligence. Some organizations are like, I don't care so much about the interaction and seeing what they're doing. I just want the alert. I want to know that they're there. I want to respond to it and shut it down. But some organizations want to do some counterintelligence. They want to understand what their adversaries are doing, what they're after, what techniques they're using, and things like that. Coverage. So external versus internal, or both. So internal, obviously your internal network, that helps you identify someone that's already penetrated and is trying to traverse. And then, excuse me, did I say that wrong? Internal. But anyway, so yeah, external is like, do you put this on your perimeter and then just start collecting all the noise you're going to get hit with on the internet? Maybe that's not something you want to tackle in your program. And then so what assets are you looking to protect or implement deception on? So is it network layer, application layer, or data layer? Then validation, right? Like how are you validating things are working? So what do the metrics look like, and how are you testing to validate that everything is working the way you expect it to? And then incident response. How are you integrating it with your incident response process? So I think that's all a part of things you should start to think about if you're planning on developing a deception program. Now I have this question here, audit and compliance. So this is an interesting one. Did someone just woo for audit and compliance? All right. All right, I admit, I've had an audit role in the past, so woo audit. So, all right, so this is interesting. I talked to one organization that was trying out the concept of the honeypots or the deception, and they got it started, and during that period, they got hit with this really grueling audit, so it was like, their client required this audit to be conducted on their network, and the client required a certain agency that implements audit, and they got this guy to come in, and this was like an ex-military guy that done audits in Iraq and Afghanistan, so he just like stuck it to them. I mean, he was this the security officer that was working with them on the audit process. He had to like take a vacation after it. He was so worn out from it. But the point of this is kind of interesting because he said that, as he was getting, beat down on everything, he finally brought up the fact, he's like, oh yeah, we're running honeypots. And the guy was just like, what? He was like, you're actually being proactive? And so that was almost, he said it was almost like a turning point in the audit, and there was like a little bit of a different tone, which that's completely unexpected, but that might be a hint of things to come, right? From an audit and compliance perspective, does deception become a part of compliance? I've heard someone say, because Gartner, the research analyst company that is known out there, they're covering this space, and so I've heard people say that, well, once they cover it for a while, then compliance starts and regulation starts to catch wind of it, and then they'll start requiring it to be a part of their requirements. So I think we could see that coming in the future as well. So challenges, some other challenges in the deception space. This gets kind of interesting. So I think currently some of the solutions out there might be a bit heavy to deploy, and in some cases they're actually introducing operational risk, whether that's legitimate or perceived. But in some cases, they're operating in line with production traffic, so and then detecting something bad and then routing that production traffic to a honeypot sensor or a trap, right? So that causes operational people that, where their butts are on the line for production being up, they're going to freak out, right? And they're not going to be willing to take on that operational risk. So I think that's a challenge there. Luers and breadcrumb management. So just imagine your network littered with all this garbage. So is it a problem? Is it not a problem? How do you manage it? That's not necessarily an easy problem to solve. This is interesting. So vulnerability scans and reporting, right? So if you've deployed these honeypots throughout your network, and you have a vulnerability scan program, now all of a sudden you're popping up vulnerable systems all over your network. What does that do to your scorecard for your reporting and your whole vulnerability management process? So that's another area that is a challenge. Deception data risk, right? So if you're doing deception at the data layer, right? So that let's say you have a database with just a bunch of fake customer records, right? And you have that database out there as a honeypot database, and you're just looking for people who pulls that data, accesses that data. So okay, that's cool, but what if an intruder gets that data and then is able to exfiltrate that data and then post it on Pastebin? Oh, well, it's fake data. Well, the optics of that are not, right? So now you're an organization that has had a legitimate breach, and even though it's not real customer data, try to tell the public that. So you have a bit of an issue there with that as well. So those are some things to think about. External facing scorecards, right? So if you're putting deception on your external facing properties, there are companies out there that do whatever analysis from the outside and produce these scorecards. That's actually pretty big in the financials industry, and they're very sensitive to that. So that's another challenge as well. This was an interesting one that came up, the last bullet there, and I got this, again, from the conversations I've been having, is how do you do deception with third-party vendors, right? So they're starting to outsource a lot of their data that they care about to third-party vendors, so SaaS solutions, cloud solutions. They don't have control over those systems or networks to implement deception. So they're trying to figure out, well, that's where all my stuff is. How do I do deception there, right? So that's a big challenge. Okay, so some takeaways from all of this. I think get the basics covered first, right? So if you are thinking about deception, but you don't have patch management down or vulnerability assessment down, stop thinking about deception, get that stuff down. Yeah, definitely do that first. Think about your story for deception, really the program, right? What are the goals? What are you trying to achieve with it? And then investigate, solutions as you would normally for any product you're looking to buy. Make sure it's right size for your organization's maturity level. So these are just kind of my solutions, must-haves. Has to have the capability to be tailored, be easy to deploy, easy to automate and integrate, lightweight, and low touch to manage. All right, so last year I had a cartoon to show the kind of concept of honeypots and making your network dangerous, and it was this cartoon character bear chasing after another character, and he came across this area which was a bunch of rakes on the ground. So, of course, he steps on the rakes, he gets hit in the face, and he steps on the other one, gets hit in the face. So I was like, well, I don't want to replay that one, but I like any good researcher, the first place you research is Giphy and Google Images. So I did find something that I thought was appropriate. So here's your deception. So it's funny, but that's exactly what you want. So it's exactly what you want with honeypots and deception, right? Because in some sense, if if an attackers are targeting your network, right, and they actually discover, oh crap, I'm on a honeypot, or this is a honeypot, they're going to pack up and leave. And I've actually had conversations with some folks that work in nation state type of scenarios, and they said just that. If we discover we're on a honeypot, like we get the heck out of there really quick. So that's exactly what you want. And it kind of goes back to the saying of you don't have to run faster than your friends. You don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than your friends. So you want the attackers to think you're too high risk, too costly to attack, so they'll go somewhere else, right? Poor horse. All right, so project updates. No, so someone tweeted that, and I was actually, while I was working on my slides, someone tweeted that. I'm like, this is too good. So okay, yeah. So project updates, and I apologize, I might finish a little early, but okay. All right, so HoneyPy, I mentioned HoneyPy earlier. You may not know what it is. Basically, this is a project I have out there on GitHub. It's an open source project, of course. It implements low to medium interaction honeypotting, plugin based, and written in Python. I'm not going to go too much into this because I just wanted to do a quick update. And I did want to kind of, was it Racket Packet? Killian, is he here? Oh, he is here. Okay, cool. I just want to say, just to encourage you on putting that stuff on GitHub, because this was a project I started 4 years ago or something. It was, and I wanted a project to learn Python better. So I was like, and I also was a honeypot enthusiast. So I'm like, I'm going to just try to write a honeypot. And so I put it out there a long time ago, and it's kind of done pretty well. So, I don't know how to judge pretty well. But, when you get that first pull request, it's pretty awesome. You're like, oh, wow, someone's actually using this and they want to help improve it. So I've had several pull requests on plugins. And, recently, actually, I felt like the project was kind of getting stale a little bit, and I just haven't had a lot of time to work on it. So it's kind of maybe going in a different direction. Was going to maybe just kind of let it die on its own. But then I started getting all these pull requests again. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So it's got new life. So, but also the folks at DC 919, they wanted to use this as a project as for the group to so people can help to learn Python, but also work on a security solution together. So I think that's awesome. So it gives this new life. So the June meetup, I'll be doing a presentation on HoneyPy and a workshop and all that stuff, so definitely sign up for that. Cool. All right, so HoneyDB. All right, so HoneyDB is a community-driven honeypot data aggregation service. HoneyDB collects and publishes honeypot data via its website and API. So I have this URL, honeydb.io. You can go there to see it, and it'll actually redirect to another URL, but that's okay. Actually, I'll bring it up just so I have some screenshots, just because demos tend to fail, and I wasn't really planning to do a demo. But so this is, aggregating data from a bunch of sensors that are out there on the internet, honeypot sensors that are out there, and it's collecting all this data here and presenting it, with some, graphical representations and some stats, some basic stats. See, I knew that was going to be slow, so I'm just going to show you. So we have some graphs there, but also there's an API, so you can start querying and accessing the data as well. So let me just go. Also, investigation, if you're curious about seeing what's actually happening in these sessions that are occurring on these honeypots, you can actually drill down into that. So this is just by service. I'll try to pick a small one. But you can go in and see, so this is an example, you can't see it very well, but you can actually see the username and passwords that they're trying to brute force some service, right? Yeah, so country, whatever. All right, I'll just let that run. Okay, so just some features with HoneyDB that I wanted to highlight today, and is really the API, as I mentioned. So there's bad hosts, so you can download a list of bad hosts, which are IPs that are hitting these honeypots. You can also get sensor data, so the actual session data that is being captured from that. And then Twitter threat feed. So this was a cool kind of part of the project where, well, with HoneyPy, one of the things you could do with it is have it tweet all the events that it gets hit with, right? So I started doing that, and then I noticed on Twitter that other people were running honeypots and tweeting those events their events as well. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So I put together an aggregation. So I sucked down all those tweets, aggregate all that data, and also publish it via the API. So you get this aggregation of all those honeypots that are tweeting. And then this is just some reference to a recent tool I released, which I'll actually touch on a little bit later. And then and so that's kind of like a command line tool that you can use to work with the API. And then someone out there wrote a console based tool that you can run as well to interact with the API. So how does it work? So yeah, so I kind of, I wanted to not just show the tool or anything like that, but talk a little bit more about it and kind of its evolution over the last year. So the original architecture, right? So basic web app, MySQL, PHP, super secure. And so you had the web, you had the API, and then some sensors out there that are just constantly sending data to the application to collect it. But there's a scale problem, right? So if basically what I'm doing with this project, if you run HoneyPy, anybody in the world can run HoneyPy and start submitting data. So I could have hundreds, thousands of people submitting data to this site, and it's just MySQL PHP on this crappy server because I had a reliability problem using a provider called crap@cost.com. And by the way, a lot of fun reading if you like reading hate on the internet. There's the Reddit Cloud at Cost and all this stuff. I actually still use them, but I'll talk about that later, I think. But anyway, so I had a reliability problem, right? So I had this cool service out there. It could fall down at any moment because crap. But also not just their unreliability, but also the volumes of traffic if people really started doing this. So I started thinking about so then also, how much would it cost to actually run something like this? Just based on recent estimates, looking at various cloud providers, it could be upwards of $400 to $500 a month. This is a hobby project. I'm not willing to kind of fork over $400 to $500 a month for a hobby project, and a lot of that costs in the cloud ends up being storage, right? So I try to keep 90 days of the data. And that's about 50 gigs on average. So it gets expensive. So I was trying to brainstorm on how can I like get funding to like help support this project. So last year I came up with this idea called Honeypots as a service. And I was like, it's so amazing. You has to have it, right? Honeypots as a service. Did you see what I did there? So basically what this was is anybody go to HoneyDB, log in, and request credits, and then we do a PayPal transaction. It started out like $10 a month, right? That would cover the hosting costs for the sensor, and then have a little extra to support the other infrastructure costs and things like that. So it was a bit experimental. I thought people would think it's cool, but as it turned out, you don't have to have it. Nobody. Well, not nobody. I actually had a few people inquire about it. Honestly, I didn't market it or kind of push it out there very much. So maybe that's why there wasn't a lot of attention to it. But I funny enough, like this year, like once a month, someone has been requesting credit. So that's kind of interesting. So anyway. No. No, because you can request multiple ones, but yeah. Okay, but community, right? The Carolina Con connection. Is NovCon here? Anybody from NovCon here? There you go. Okay, awesome. So I got to call these guys out. These guys are so amazing. So after my talk last year, they approached me and were like, hey, we can help you out. We have VMs and infrastructure that we can let you use for this project. And I was just like blown away by that. They also run a threat info project called Minotaur. So go check those guys out because they are awesome. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate that. And that's the coolness of, I think, community, right? But it's still, so now I have VMs that are reliable, right? And I have a finite amount of storage, finite amount of, as far as being able to handle volumes of load and whatnot. So I still need to scale. So what if, like, again, thousands of sensors were set up out there? How am I going to handle that load? So I started to think about cloud services that were out there, and that enters Frankenstein, right? So, trying to run this on a low budget, I'm looking for like the cheapest, providers that are out there that can help with this. So Frankenstein actually scales, and he says himself, Frankenstein scale. So anyway, so what does this look like? What is this Frankenstein Cloud Architecture? This is what it looks like. So all these logos in the cloud, I'm actually leveraging with some caveats there, which I'll highlight, but I'm leveraging all these basically the main thing that's going to be handling a lot of if I get like thousands of sensors out there pounding, sending data, I'm using functions as a service from different providers, and so those easily scale up and can handle a lot of that and absorb all that. But I'll take you through the architecture here to explain that. So in the middle, you have the sensors out there. It could be thousands. It's going to first get an authentication token from the main web service, and then all the data is going to be sent to these functions as the service. So why am I using multiple providers? Because each of those providers have free tiers. One provider, I might max that out easily. I mean, I have days where I have over 1 million events sent in one day, so that can max out pretty easily within a month. So I'm like, well, what if I spread it across all the free tiers? And then potentially I can even open multiple accounts on free tiers, but haven't gone that far yet. So the functions are absorbing that volume and then sticking it in Google Cloud PubSub, which is just a message queuing service. So it stays there. And that's just like dirt cheap. It's like cents a month. So it's pretty awesome. And so then my database and MySQL database on the NovCon VM servers are pulling that down as it can ingest it, right? It's not going to get overloaded or anything like that. Also pulling tweets, and then I have some replication going there because, I used to be a DBA, so replication. And then I'm also using BigQuery from on Google Cloud. So like I said, I'm only keeping 90 days worth of data on the database, so that's what you can actively query against. But I'm streaming all the archive data to BigQuery, and I think right now, and I think it's compressed, it's like over 50 gigs, and that's going back a couple of years of data. So that's pretty awesome. And again, that's like cents per month. It's pretty crazy. So if you want to build a large-scale application, I mean, this is kind of the shift of where things are going. I don't know if there's any AppSec people in here, and you're starting to see that. But this is almost like, this is architecture for IoT, but even normal web apps and stuff are going to start moving to this type of architecture. So blockchain, what about blockchain, right? Like that's all the hotness, right? I've got all this crazy technology, and so, but what about putting blockchain into this? Well, not yet. So, thinking about it. Okay, so a note on serverless functions, right? So I set out to use all the free tier providers. I want to highlight, you might be surprised, IBM's functions as a service, their IBM Cloud Service is actually the best. Just from a usability and getting up and running and cost. And then obviously AWS is robust, but it does get expensive. There's charges for the API gateway. And then, so Google Cloud Functions, so I have kind of, this is like Frankenstein's arm falling off, right? So I'm not using those right now because, it's so stupid. So Google, I'm using Google's service, Google's libraries to talk to Google's PubSub, and it just errors out all the time. Like it doesn't make sense. So I just didn't have time to really dive deep and try to troubleshoot what's going on with that. But maybe I will one day. Azure Cloud, oh my gosh. Couldn't even get it up and running just to get dependencies installed for Python, and they just have this really silly way of doing it, and it doesn't work. So I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to waste more time on that right now. So what does it all cost? Kind of, this is what I'm tracking cost that you see here. So by service provider, does it show the red? Yeah, the red. So AWS, I'm also using DigitalOcean to run sensors, Google Cloud provider, IBM. So you notice the red uptick spike, right? That's actually AWS. And that is the, it's kind of interesting because they have a free tier, but I guess I'm consuming it pretty quickly. But also they have the API gateway charges, so it like doubles the cost. So that's starting to get upwards to $80 a month, which is kind of too much for me right now. So I'm actually phasing that out a little bit. And so I'll see that come down. I'm going to put more onto the IBM Cloud. And so this is just a breakdown by the various services that I'm using. So you can see the cost. The Google stuff is like just close to zero. The cloud functions spiked because of AWS, but hopefully that'll come back down. And then the sensors are kind of flatlined. Cool. All right, I got to speed up. Okay. So thinking about how to money for this project, and I'm going to move a little faster because I got 10 minutes left. So I thought, well, cryptocurrency mining, will that work? So I tried it out, like, hey, maybe if I run mining on with these honeypots, that would be a way to generate some money for the project, but it's not practical. But I did write a cool script. So I call it Honey Miner. I just published it on GitHub today. Basically what it does, if you have some like throwaway systems that you want to run honeypots on, but also mine some coin, you won't get a lot, but you'll get something. It's a script that basically just like launches it all for you. It'll launch the HoneyDB agent. It'll download the miners and start mining coin. So right now these are the only coins that it's mining right now. But I'm gonna, it's kind of fun. So I'm gonna continue adding different miners to that as well. Okay, so continue with the theme, and so kind of blockchain is kind of fitting in here a little bit. So with the theme of cryptocurrencies, so what about running master nodes? So master nodes in the cryptocurrency world are these nodes you can run that provide greater functionality for the network to operate, basically. And so that actually has some potential. I'm currently running 5 master nodes across 2 VPSs, so that costs me $10 a month. And what the payouts they're yielding is around $100 to $200 a month. So that's not too bad. That's not shabby. So I may be doing more of that. And obviously that's going to be dependent on the the market as well, right? So it's at the mercy of the market, right? Because if the market goes down, then I'm not really yielding that much. So it has potential though. Other options, so just looking for sponsorships and potentially even commercial licensing. I've been getting queries from that as well from folks about licensing the data produced by HoneyDB. I have gray noise up there because they are actually running some of my sensors, and that contributes data to the project. Okay, so back to HAS. So this is the tools that I'm putting out there because I really want the community, definitely if you're interested in this, I'm trying to give you the tools so you can actually go out and do it, make it easy, and you can start working with it. So I have a HoneyDB agent, which is like HoneyPy, but it's a binary, so easy to deploy. And then I'll talk about the API endpoints and the CLI really quick. So I have some new endpoints out there. So if you're running your own agents, you'll be able to pull your data down. So before you could get like the bad host, but if you want just what you're collecting, your data, you'll be able to do that. So it's all filtered now, so you can download that stuff. So the API client tool, it's easy as installing. Just run pip install HoneyDB, and it'll install. It gives you all the commands and whatnot to query the database. It's also got a module in it, so if you want to script your own Python around it, you can do that as well. Cool. So I want to just show some examples of the data that comes out of running the honeypots. And so these are just some basic examples. So again, if you're interested in kind of learning more about this stuff and kind of seeing what attacks are occurring out there, this is a great way to do it. So this is an example web request that you might see that's attempting to do SQL injection on some kind of checkout application. And then Telnet, this is an example of something you would see where, if they've guessed the password to the honeypot, they've got this fake shell now, then they start trying to download all their malware to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. There's one cool example that I'm going to highlight, which was kind of recent. It was this PowerShell. You see this? Sorry, it's kind of hard to see. But it was an XML payload. Basically, it was like a recent, well, I don't know if it's recent, but it was a WebLogic exploit where they're executing a PowerShell, and there's some other stuff going on there. One thing to note about this, actually, I wanted to point out, I actually started seeing struts 2 being thrown at the honeypots like months and months and months before it came out. And I remember seeing it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, that's different. I just didn't have time to follow up on it. But that's the kind of thing you might find, right? So that was cool. All right, so again, limited on time. So and kind of tying into community stories, the community story. This is just that payload decoded there, so you can see it's trying to download something as well. So I met someone at the Security Beers meetup, Malware Mechanic, and there he is right there. I'm pointing him out so you can all say hi. He's a malware reverse engineer. So I saw this payload and I was like, hey, do you want to try poking at this to see what it actually is doing? So he did this awesome analysis on it, so I wanted to share that with you. So he analyzed the initial post. From that, he was able to pull apart that it was contained a scanner, a worm, and a remote access toolkit. And then he discovered it appears to be Ghost Miner to mine Monero. So continuing with the blockchain theme, right? That's you've probably seen a lot of that recently, where exploits are being used to start mining cryptocurrencies. So I'm like, mining Monero or Ghost Miner to mine Monero. Ghost Miner, add that to Honey Miner? Well, maybe not. I'm not going to go that far. So just to continue with the analysis, it was a post utilizes Java deserialization vulnerability to execute the base64 encoded PowerShell command. It downloads more stuff, installs the crypto miner via WMI, attempts to stop various services and tasks, and it also attempts to stop other miners that might be running on the system because it needs to have all the CPU, and stops other processes from listening and whatnot, and also saw some reference to PowerShell reflective Mimikatz. So very cool stuff. So thanks to Malware Mechanic for doing that. Cool. So those are the tools I'm providing. So hey, go forth in Honeypot. If you can download HoneyPy or the HoneyDB agent, and run that stuff on any system that you have. If you want to use the HAS service, it's only $5 a month, and that's just at cost to run a host of VPC on DigitalOcean. You can certainly get your own VPC on DigitalOcean and run it that way. So, but yeah, I definitely would like to see everybody try to bring it down by running as many honeypots as you can. So I'll have to, solve those problems. But cool. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah. What level of server? Oh, so it's a web service, and I would consider it in between low and medium. It's actually, in that case, it was a WebLogic exploit. So I have something in that module that actually accepts that path for that WebLogic exploit. And then I actually just categorize it, hey, this is WebLogic, right? So yeah, so it's just saying, it does give a response back to that they might see from a real WebLogic server, so that gives them a little bit of confidence that whatever their automation is doing or however they're doing it, so. Cool, any other questions? Yeah.
What's your opinion on the commercialized Honey networks or Honeypot solutions compared to using open source?
Well, it's both are good, right? It just boils down to, it depends on the organization, right? Do you have the appetite? Because open source is going to come with a lot of engineering that you'll need to apply to it, right? So if you have the time, money, and resources, then hey, you can do it. But it just becomes that build versus buy question. And so, obviously, vendors will provide stuff that'll, be much, easier to manage from that standpoint. From an investment standpoint, I think, but it just depends on what your appetite is for engineering in your organization. But there's good open source stuff out there. So cool. Any other questions? All right, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.